The Influencer's Edge is brought to you by the Invisible Influence Series. If you're ready to massively increase your sales by leveraging the power of subconscious persuasion, then make sure you text the word COMPEL to 411321. That's COMPEL to 411321. And if you're outside of the United States, then use WhatsApp and text the word COMPEL to 1-909-741-1321. Make sure you put in your best email address because that's how we'll deliver the goodies. Welcome to the Influencer's Edge. This is the place where you come to get the latest breakthroughs, cutting-edge insights, tools, and techniques to leapfrog over the pack in sales, persuasion, and influence. Be sure you visit our website at www.theinfluencersedge.com. And while you're there, subscribe to us via your favorite network. Now sit back, tune in, and enjoy today's episode. All right, today we have a very unusual and special guest on the Influencer's Edge. As you all know, this podcast is devoted for sales and influence to making some skrilla, some cash, some dough. However, our guest today, Jørgen, am I saying that right? It's a Norwegian name.
Pretty close.
Jørgen Rasmussen is a powerful agent for personal change. And that definitely is a form of influence, especially because he's known for working with very difficult clients where everyone else fails. So let me just give a little bit of his biography. Jørgen Rasmussen is an agent of change and a powerful change artist. He has a background in meditation, neurolinguistic programming, and hypnosis. And he teaches something called the psychological illusion model, which we're going to take a deep dive into. He's also the author of 2 amazing books. Do you happen to have copies of those books that you can show off? I mean, we are recording, but are they at hand?
Not right.
Not, that's fine. But they're called, one is Provocative Hypnosis, the other is Provocative Suggestion. And if you're into hypnosis or influence of any kind, I really recommend you pick up those books. They are not on Amazon, except what are they on Amazon? Like 100?
Oh yeah, they are on Amazon.
Okay, they are on Amazon. All right. And so we're just going to dive in. Jørgen is very pragmatic. He doesn't accept anything as true or with a capital T. And I love how he thinks. We've been friends for quite some time. I don't remember how we met. You were out in Southern California, I think, for NLP training. But welcome to the show, Jørgen.
Thank you. Great to be here.
So I want to dive into your journey as a change worker. You are known as someone who works with the most difficult clients. Clients come to you, I don't know how we want to refer to them in a way that's respectful, but there are definitely people who, I don't know if they're on their last legs, but they certainly have not had a lot of results with whatever conventional therapies that they've taken on. Would that be safe to say?
Well, that is often the case when people come in. I'm usually not a first resort for a lot of people. So, but I mean, it's excuse my voice. It's true in general. I think when people seek help, they usually haven't had much help before that. So it's one of those things. But I have had a fascination from very early on to working with people where traditional approaches to change haven't quite gotten there.
And so let's define, you have been exposed very early on to neurolinguistic programming. How would you define NLP in a way that's useful for changing people? Not in a way that's traditional seminar NLP, way in which you use it to influence and change people. Because a lot of it, we agree, a lot of it is bullshit.
Yeah. I'm very pragmatic, and I think of NLP as just like the study of subjective experience. You know, this basic idea, the basic idea that the map is not the territory, meaning that most of our challenges are due to how we kind of think about things versus the, call it the situations or the conditions themselves for the most part. And that our inner experience kind of has a structure of sorts that we can kind of look into our own experience and tweak it and nudge it and discover, that's kind of how that works. And if I use my attention in this way, or I construct my experience slightly differently, then I can have a different experience of something. So I view it as basic as that.
Now, how do you apply it again in the therapy? You've got some great stories in your books. You don't just use NLP, but you also use other modalities like cognitive behavioral therapy, where you get people. But I want to talk to you about one of the things I think is so fascinating that you've used with your clientele, which is the Devil's Pact. Can you tell us about the Devil's Pact? And then I want to dive into the psychological illusion model and hypnosis and some other things. What is the Devil's Pact?
Well, I stole it from a guy called Jay Haley, which is one of these psychotherapists of old. But it's just a pact where I say to people that, look, if I'm giving people some sort of ordeal or task specifically designed for them, I will often say to them, look, I have something here for you that I think is very likely to work. But before I tell you what it is, I need your commitment that you'll do it. And I promise you in advance, it's not illegal, it's not dangerous, and it's not fattening. You know, I added the fattening to get more female compliance. You know, they would often go unethical, dangerous, don't care, not fattening. I'm on board. It's fine.
Can you tell us about some of the Devil Pact specifically with some of the clients? They're outlined in both of your books, but I really want you to give us some of the examples of the clients where you successfully used the Devil's Pact. I've done similar things, but I don't want to talk about me. I want you to dive into it.
Yeah. Well, you know, sometimes it's just a matter of securing a really firm commitment on something. So, for example, one thing that immediately comes to mind is a smoker, and now ex-smoker, quite a few years ago, who had tried all sorts of stuff to stop smoking, and we had kind of gotten there for the most part, but she would struggle every time she would be out and alcohol was present. Like anytime she would drink alcohol, she would start smoking again, and this was a long-standing pattern. So I made the Devil's Pact with her, and she was kind of political and had very strong opinions. So I asked her, you know, what's an amount of money that you would really feel as a stench if you lost? I can't quite remember the amount, but I think it was like $3,000 or something like that she kind of landed on, that would be brutal. And I asked her, you know, is there any organization or political party that you just resent, that you just can't stand? And she landed on the Norwegian kind of conservative party, because she was pretty far left in her political views. And I said, is there anyone in your life that you trust with money and who is also very invested in you quitting smoking? And she said, yes, my daughter. She's very conscientious, and she's been on me with smoking for a long, long time. So I had her commit that she made this bank account that both she and her daughter had access to, and I can't quite remember the time frame that we set up, but the setup was that her daughter was to go with her initially to these social gatherings where she would have alcohol, and if she ever smoked, she would have to pay that amount of money to the Norwegian Conservative Party. And the really fascinating thing about this was that, like, as soon as she made that commitment, there was not even an urge. like even when she drank alcohol, went to a party, no matter how drunk she was, the thought to do it didn't.
Right. Right. But you have one that's really interesting where I think it's one where you had the person, the guy who there's two of them. One was the guy who is terrified to talk to women. Do you remember the one I'm talking about?
I've had quite a few of those, but do you remember specifically or more specifically?
I'm trying to think, but we can skip past that one. You also had one where you had a client who you accused of masturbating in public.
Yeah. Well, that was a fun one. I stole the term masturbating from this old, now dead, late psychologist called Albert Ellis, who was the founder of rational emotive behavior therapy. And he would talk about how a lot of our anxieties essentially comes from masturbating, turning our wants and desires into these musts.
Yeah.
So I worked with this woman who in the UK on stage, where I had the Devil's Pact with her. John Grinder had sent her, one of the co-founders of NLP. And I made the Devil's Pact with her that she would do whatever I asked her to, provided it wasn't illegal, unethical, or fattening. And she agreed. She was very anxious and very angry and had problems sleeping. And she was, I can't quite remember how that worked, but she was one of the persons who was part of the board to evaluate whether someone would get parole, essentially, in many of these. Does that rapist get the early release? That does that person?
Yeah.
Those sorts of things. And I noticed, and a lot of her stress was connected with her job, but it was a pattern all over her life, essentially. And I noticed in the space of a couple of minutes that she used the word must and have to like more than 10 times. We must get it right. We must not make a mistake. We must make the right decision, right? And she was so responsive, like you could see her physiology, you could see the anxiety come on as she described this. And I knew from her history that she used to be very religious, but she was no longer. So I'm always looking for ways how I can kind of exploit or use people's particular belief systems or whatever. So she tells her story, and I call her Maureen in the book, so I'll use that name. So I suddenly look at her and I say to her, Maureen, didn't you know that it's a sin to masturbate in public? And I look at her very sternly because this is in front of an audience. And she stops and she gets confused and she said, what? And I said, you heard me. It's a sin to masturbate in public. And she goes, well, what do you mean I haven't? I must not make a mistake, must not do this. You're masturbating all over the place. And the audience started laughing and she kind of blushed a little bit with this. And I said to her, as a formerly good Christian, it's only fair that you confess to your sins and atone for them, when you make them. So the part of the Devil's Pact was that if she started getting really or doing anxiety in meetings, she would have to make a public confession. So specifically, the next meeting she was in, I think there was 12 people in the room, and she got lost in anxiety a little bit, and she started debating, this crazy Norwegian who she had this pact with. And as a godsend, this colleague said, Maureen, are you okay? And she had this moment where she had to fess up and she said, well, actually, I have a confession to make. And the whole room went silent because it's like confession in that sort of, for the last few minutes, I've been sitting here masturbating rather intensely. Everyone looks at her and she gets embarrassed and she says, well, masturbating as in we must get this right. We must not make the wrong decision. And exactly half the room started laughing and the other ones were like terrified or but that was one way of kind of using humor and laughter and a little bit of shock and provocation to break her pattern a little bit. And she started to she started to turn her musts back into wants, like, you know, like really want to make the best decision, and we're going to do our best, but you know, it doesn't have
I think
to be that way.
This really ties into my listenership, because salespeople and professional influencers, and so often they're in their efforts to motivate themselves, they say, I must do better, or I should do better at making my cold calls, or I must be better at following up, or I must go for the high ticket clients. And it really just creates a loop of anxiety where you unfortunately disconnect yourself from your most resourceful states and your own capabilities. So I think it's a really brilliant adaptation of the technique, and an example of how you could have taken her aside and hypnotized her to get rid of her anxiety, but you didn't choose to do that. You did a different kind of intervention. And so this speaks to, for the folks at home, I think it speaks to the need to be flexible. If you're going to really be a good influencer, whether it's for therapy or for sales or just your personal relationships, you have to be able to read the situation and be flexible. That's one of the reasons why I wanted to bring you on, because you're dealing with people who are really, really stuck. Some of them even have pathologies. Let's take a dive into what you call the psychological illusion model, because this is new to me. We haven't, to be transparent, spoken in a few years, but I knew I had to have you on the show because we've had some very interesting non-G-rated conversations. By the way, you don't curse, but it's a non-family show, so you can say whatever you want. Right. What is the psychological illusion model, and how is it practically applicable for people who want to influence in any way, whether it's therapeutic or influence themselves to change?
Yeah. So if we take anxiety as an example, which is relevant for most salespeople, you know that typical Buddhist story of the monk that walks in the desert and he sees a snake and he kind of freaks out a little bit, and then he looks at it a second time and he has the realization that it's a rope. And at the moment of realizing that it's a rope, you know, his pulse goes down, his heartbeat goes down, his sweat response goes down, the catastrophic thoughts disappear. Not because he tries to relax, but because he suddenly sees that the threat that he thought was there wasn't actually there.
Yeah.
So the framework I have when I see clients, I'll just mention that quickly to set a stage. Well, when I speak to a prospective clients, I tell them, look, I have some friends who do mentalism, like mental magic internationally, and also traditional magic. And when these guys show a new trick, you know, I always fall for it. I feel like an idiot because I always fall for the tricks. You know, everyone does. But the interesting thing is that on the one hand, I know that what I'm seeing isn't real. It's a trick of sorts, but it feels real.
Yeah.
And everything I try to do to kind of figure it out has a tendency to drive me more deeply into the misunderstanding. And I have a tendency to link this to their anxiety or their obsession or their compulsion. And I say, look, what you're here for is essentially a psychological illusion of sorts. It's a magic trick of the mind, meaning it's something that looks extremely real, but if you know how to look at it, if you know how to explore it, you'll have a chance to discover that it's not quite what it appears to be.
And you're talking. Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry. I'm.
Yeah. So a bit like with the magic trick, you know, something's going on, but it's never quite what you think it is. So I say to people, consider what we do together a bit as if you were to, you know, join a magician backstage, and through various experiments get the chance to kind of uncover the trick. Because the moment you get the trick, it's often one of those like, is that how it works? Is that how it works? I mean, you're less likely to as easily fall for the same trick. And even if you do, it's easier to kind of disentangle yourself from it because you kind of get how it works. And I think this is very, one analogy I like to use is, back in 1895, the first ever movie was shown in France, Paris, France. It was a 90-second long clip of a train moving toward a train station. Yeah. And a lot of people allegedly threw themselves out of their seats to not get hit over by the train. I consider a lot of the hangups that people have a bit like that. Like, when I say illusion, I don't mean non-existent. I mean something's going on, but it's not quite what you think it is. So with
it
the
sounds
movie,
to me, if I can draw an analogy,
yeah.
So in a sales world, when people make an objection, it's very rarely what they think it is. It
Right.
really is about something else.
Yeah, yeah. So in terms of the train, it really looks as if you're experiencing a train coming towards you, and the feelings in your body are real, the adrenaline and the cortisol and all that sort of stuff. But if you take someone up into the projection booth and you help them to kind of discover the nature of film, you can help them discover that, wait a minute, no matter what you think you see on that screen, it really is a blank screen and a play of lights. And once you kind of get that, you're not going to leap from your seat again when you think you see the train.
Can you unpack and bring it down the ground and give a for instance, or a practical example of how this would be used or how you've used it with clients?
Well, pretty much every client who comes in points their finger outwards and says, look, I have these feelings and they're caused by my wife, right, or my daughter, right, or my past, or the uncertain future, or my low self-esteem, or when the doors close in the elevator. Like it really looks as if there's a thing out there that's directly causing them to think in a particular way, right?
Right.
So what I try to do is I try to guide them through experiments where they kind of discover that, wait a minute, I'm really experiencing a thought. So I have an example from my first book, which I think illustrates this very well. I had a fear of heights client who worked as one of those, these poles that people have to climb, like the electricians.
Yeah.
And that was a really bad combination, to have that fear of heights with that, right? So I used to have one of those poles right outside of my old office, and I told him to bring his climbing shoes. And when he came in, he was so adamant that it was the height in and of itself that made him feel that way. And I tried to kind of suggest that, it can't quite be the height in of itself. It kind of has to be how you think about it, because not everyone has the same fear response given those sorts of heights. And he just wouldn't, like, it didn't resonate with him. And I tried to evoke the fear in the office by having him imagine various things, and it just didn't resonate. Now, I had the devil's pact with him because I had a hunch it would be difficult. So I said, okay, get your fucking shoes on. We're going climbing. And as soon as he put on the shoes, he started to feel because now it was real. And we went outside to the pole. And before he started climbing, I said to him, on a scale from 0 to 10, where 0 is neutral and 10 is terrified, where are you at the moment? I think he said something like a 4. Now, the guy wasn't even climbing. He was on the ground, right? And then he started climbing and he went all the way up. And I said, where are you at now? Well, 7, 8, 9, 9.5. And then I said to him, you can come down now. And he immediately started coming down, but I stopped him after like a 1.5 meters. And I said, where are you now? And he said, well, maybe like a 2 or a 1, because I know I'm going down. but he was still way up there, right? So
Right.
So he was like at a 2, like 7, meters up there or whatever. But he was like a 4 on the ground, right? So he came down. As he landed, I grabbed him physically, which is of course something you're not supposed to do. I grabbed him like and stabilized him and looked at him with intent. And I said, "You're a 4 standing on the ground. You're a 2 way up there. How on earth can it be the height?" I just looked at him really, really intently. And in that moment, he had like a eureka moment where he was like, fuck, shit, like he saw it. Now we did some additional exercises, but for him, that was the moment.
You did. Now, so essentially what you're doing is a massive pattern interrupt, which is something we teach in sales. You often have to interrupt the person and even confuse them a little bit in a strategic way.
Yeah. And I try to, in the spirit of Milton Erickson, to kind of organize.
And for those you, hold on just one second, if you may, if I could, Milton Erickson was the founder of modern hypnotherapy. In my opinion, he was to hypnotherapy what Einstein was to physics.
I'll second that, even though I know nothing about physics, but.
Yeah. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Some people don't know who he is.
Yeah. No, I get that. So I try to organize a context, use some artistry, use some humor, use some shock, use some confusion, some drama, where people can naturally have an experience where they can make some new discoveries.
I think this is extremely useful if you are in sales. Because if someone comes to you, a prospect or a potential client, whatever it is, and they're rigid in their perceptions or their ideas, you're not going to break them out of it by accepting their frame and their beliefs and the rest of it. And it goes contrary also to the idea, this is an NLP holy writ that you don't challenge, is always stay in rapport.
Yeah.
But what I'm trying from the lesson you're giving is, you're doing some confusion through a pattern interrupt, and you're sort of breaking rapport so that he can have a new realization.
Yeah. And, rapport is an interesting topic. I tend to think of it as responsiveness.
Yes.
Like, do you have, is the person responding to you in a sense? Like, I think 2 people can like each other a lot, but there's not necessarily much responsiveness. You also have an instance of people might not necessarily like each other that much, but you can see that there's a responsiveness there. They're in tune. So I think in these cases too, there is also an element of me not being afraid of their experience.
What does that mean?
Well, it means when I see a client, I'm not scared of their inner experience. So let's say, for example, that someone comes in and mortality is an issue for them.
Dying.
Let's say they have fear of dying or something like that.
That's everybody, but I get you.
Yeah. I mean, to various degrees. But if I, as their helper, have strong fears around that myself, and that person brings up the mortality topic, I'm probably likely to try to save them. Like, I'm not comfortable with them, so I need them to be comfortable, in a sense, for me not to be comfortable. So I think one of the things that makes these interventions often powerful is that I have a very clarified relationship to fear. Like, I'm not afraid of my own emotions. So I can stay present with the client, even if they have a strong fear response, without needing to save them or shut down or escape. Like the ability to be completely present with them wherever they are. And I think this is somewhat theoretical, but I think there's a subtle element in rapport, as in, okay, this person has the ability to stay present with me in the midst of the experience.
And I think this is so powerful for people who are in sales, because if you're with your prospect and you're in your head trying to figure out how do I close them or what's my next step, I understand that there has to be something of a process to follow. But on the other hand, you really have to be in that state where you're present and you're aware of what's going on, just so you can calibrate to their cues and what's happening with them. Otherwise, you're just flapping your lips and enjoying your presentation, but they're not there with you.
Yeah. And I think what often gets in the way for people is the masturbation. These ideas that they must succeed, or must close, or must get the outcome, or must not get the no, versus merely strongly preferring it and going for it.
Got it. I love it.
Because I've seen a lot of salespeople too as clients, who've had performance anxiety and stuff like that. And that, to me, anxiety looks like I say to my clients, like, imagine a table that needs two legs to stand, like whatever table that would be, right? I said, on the one hand, you have to demand an outcome. Like you have to demand an outcome, or you have to demand a guarantee that something must happen or must not happen. That's one of the tables. The other table is you have to have an awareness that you don't really have that guarantee. And if you do both of those simultaneously, I think you're guaranteed an anxiety response.
I got it. Yeah.
And that the intensity of the feeling is going to be proportional to the strength of the demand. So it's a bit like if you look at the whole COVID situation, like everyone knows that if you're old and you have underlying conditions, you're more likely to catch it, or get sick, right? But if you look at who's anxious, you have 16-year-old, very healthy kids who are not at all likely to die from COVID, who have anxiety through the roof. And you might have an 84-year-old dude with cancer who doesn't want to get COVID, but he's not panicking. He's not freaking out about it. Now, the 84-year-old dude who's not freaking out, surely he doesn't want to have COVID. Like he wants to stay healthy, but he probably doesn't masturbate about it. But the 16-year-old who's healthy, who's freaking out, knows that, well, there's a possibility that I might get really sick and die. Like it's possible. So they demand a guarantee that it must not happen, while simultaneously knowing that they don't have the guarantee. And now the mind comes in and ruminates and spins solutions, and nothing ever works, and the whole system goes into overdrive.
I think this is really a really brilliant point, because one of the things I have taught is, if you want to be good at influence and selling, you have to be willing to step into the unknown without needing a guarantee, and give the other person radical permission to have their first response to you.
Right.
And I think this is what makes someone super influential, not necessarily being the model of charisma like Tony Robbins, or sounds like I'm knocking Tony, which I kind of am, but he's a brilliant marketer and done very, very well for himself and opened people to NLP. So good on him. And I think that model of charisma cannot be everyone's outcome. They're just not, it's just not wired in. I don't care what people say about it. It's just not everyone can be that way, and it's not healthy. But if you can instead stay neutral, walk into the unknown, and not need a guarantee, you're much better off. Which brings us to a good segue. You're also a deeply, you're a profound student of meditation. And we have the same teacher, Shinzen Young, who, again, he is a genius. I think he is the meditation what Erickson was to hypnosis. tell us a little bit about how you got exposed to meditation, and also how it's helped you deal with what Shinzen identifies as a huge struggle, which is dealing with don't know, because humans want to know. So can you talk about that, the ability to stay okay with not knowing what the answer is going to be?
Yeah. I started meditating when I was 14, and that was transcendental meditation.
Right.
So I got bit by the bug early, and I did martial arts, and I would compete in tournaments. So I would practice sports psychology techniques and, get back into the ring and kind of test it. And so that was my first kind of context for meditation. Now, you've been lucky. I've never had the chance to meet Shinzen, but I've studied, his books and many of his audios and stuff like that. And I think he has a great model. I mean, one of my first kind of big discoveries for me in meditation after a while was realizing that, and it kind of goes back to experience being an illusion in a sense. And when saying illusion, not non-existence, but not quite what you take it to be, right? So this is, anyone who's meditated has kind of noticed that, wait a minute, my world seems a particular way, but if I really learn to focus and develop some sensory clarity, it's like, it's not quite what it appeared to be, right? So, for example, for me as a teenager, I used to think that boredom, like the experience of boredom, told me about the other person or the activity or the project. And that if I was bored, I needed to do something else. That this was just one of my fundamental.
Yeah. Well,
and then,
the way I think.
Yeah. And this happened when I was like 18 or 19. I suddenly had this like kaboom moment with boredom, because I was meditating on the breath, which in some ways is like the most boring object in the world, but really kind of breaking it down and noticing where it starts and how it moves and the various components and this and that. And it was so extremely fascinating, like a whole new world of sensations kind of opened up. And I had this like eureka moment of realizing that, you know what, boredom is just like a barometer that says that the quality of your attention is low in the moment. Because I could.
Wait, stop. I got to process that. It's not boredom. It's just that the quality of your attention is low in that moment. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
That was one of the big like eureka moments in my life, because it looked so obvious that the experience of boredom directly told me about something out there, as in that person is boring or that activity is boring, right? Like it really looked that way to me. But by meditating on the breath and also meditating on the experience of boredom, like let's really explore boredom and see how it works.
Boredom becomes paradoxically fascinating.
Extremely fascinating. That was kind of the eureka moment. Like this is like boredom. Like if you really go to town with boredom and you really experientially explore it, it's like deeply fascinating. And it was just like, what's the difference? Well, the quality of my attention right now is super high, so there's no boredom. And it suddenly dawned on me that, look, people can do anything, whether it's collecting coins or doing some, mundane activity. But if they're completely present, if they don't have any mind chatter, if there's no seeking, no resistance, they're just in the moment, there's no boredom. So it just became this, it's a signal that my quality of attention is low right now. That doesn't mean that I have to improve the quality of attention. I can still go do something else. But it kind of showed boredom to be illusory in a sense. in the sense of like, it's not quite what I thought it was.
Got it. All right, we're going to wrap up really quickly. Your books are Provocative Hypnosis, Provocative Suggestion, available on Amazon. Correct. I want to ask you, this is something I asked with some of my guests, so I'm going to ask you, you're a very well-read man. If you could name the book that has had the strongest impact on you in the last 5 to 10 years. I know you read like a monster.
Yeah.
What would that be?
And given that I read so much, it should be an easy.
So give me the top 3.
Give me the top 3. Do you want to make it more specific in terms of
when it comes to self-improvement or self-realization or influencing others? You say are at least your top.
Yeah, so
it doesn't have to be in order, but what comes to mind?
Yeah, so like in terms of like, call it
other than my book.
Yeah. Well, I have that one too. It's a good book. It's a good book. I would say for anyone who's a fan of meditation, like when it comes to like the self in a sense, there's a guy called Gary Weber who has a book called Happiness Beyond Thought, which I think is.
I'm gonna have to check that one out myself.
Yeah, which I think is excellent. I got a lot of mileage out of that. There's a book by an economist called Thomas Sowell called A Conflict of Visions. It's essentially about, it kind of explains to some extent how conservatives and liberals operate from very different visions and basic assumptions about man's nature. I found Sowell to be a profound writer, and even if you don't have any interest in politics, it's such a deep book about how we humans make meaning and how the world can look profoundly different. A third one I would add is Ian McGilchrist's The Master and His Emissary.
Oh, yes.
Just a fantastic book. I read it more than 10 years ago, but that was a mind-blowing.
That is a big tome to go through. Jørgen, thank you. Thank you for being on the show. How do people get in touch with you?
Anyone who wants to get in touch with me can find me at provocativehypnosis.com or the Provocative Hypnosis YouTube channel.
Very cool. Thanks for being on the show. And hopefully you'll get out to Southern California soon enough. I moved to the beautiful city of San Diego from LA. Oh, yeah, I've been there. And I don't know when I'll be headed for Norway's most beautiful city, Bergen. But
is there really Bergen? Oh.
Isn't that where you're at, Bergen?
No, I'm in Kongsberg, right.
Kongsberg, that's right. Excuse me, Kongsberg.
But that's in the middle of nowhere.
Kongsberg, I found it to be the most beautiful city in all of Scandinavia. There you go. All right, man. Thanks for being on the show. We'll talk soon.
Thank you.
The Influencer's Edge is brought to you by the Invisible Influence Series. If you're ready to massively increase your sales by leveraging the power of subconscious persuasion, then make sure you text the word COMPEL to 411321. That's COMPEL to 411321. And if you're outside of the United States, then use WhatsApp and text the word COMPEL to 1-909-741-1321. Make sure you put in your best email address because that's how we'll deliver the goodies. Thank you for tuning in to the Influencer's Edge, where you get the latest breakthroughs, cutting-edge insights, tools, and techniques so you can leapfrog over the pack at sales, influence, and persuasion. Remember to visit our website at www.theinfluencersedge.com to enjoy even more great episodes like this one. We look forward to seeing you again on the Influencer's Edge Show.